We are so glad to welcome you today to our Surfacing Creative Leadership conversation on the conservative dimension of the LCP. Listen, the world needs creative leadership, and we at Leadership Circle know that you, as coaches and leaders, are in the best possible position to make that happen, whether it's through your own leadership or through the way that you help guide others to grow into theirs. With our Surfacing Creative Leadership series, we are beginning and venturing into an ongoing conversation to unpack and demystify and surface insights from all the dimensions of the LCP, one dimension at a time. Today's topic is the conservative dimension, the first reactive tendency that we're tackling in the series, and a dimension that often seems to fly under the radar, but no more. Joining us for the conversation today are two Leadership Circle coaches, Pauline Lee and Ian Paterson. Welcome to you both. It is a pleasure for me to introduce you to the two of them. First, Pauline Lee. Pauline brings more than 25 years of experience in guiding leaders and teams through breakthrough transformation. She has worked as a coach and a consultant with a warm approach. She's sharp, she's deeply effective, and she helps leaders see what's holding them back and help them shift that into sustainable change. Pauline works across sectors from government to healthcare and brings both academic and real-world experience to every engagement. Her presence is known to be very grounding and energizing, and we're really excited to welcome her today. Also, it's my pleasure to introduce Ian Paterson. Ian partners with leaders navigating complexity and transformation and helps them shift long-held patterns and step into a larger vision, both of themselves and for their organizations. He brings a deep presence, commercial experience, and a rich background both in coaching and in leadership, but also in the arts. So from boardrooms to bushwalks with his dogs, Ian's work is grounded, it's personal, it's insightful, and we're thrilled to have Ian with us today as well. So the two of you, I'd like to start maybe with some basic level setting. And Ian, I understand that you're going to kind of introduce us into the framework of really what the conservative dimension is. So I turn it over to you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate that warm welcome, and hello to everyone around the globe. The brilliance of Zoom, the brilliance of what we can now do. Think about this, trying to do this 10 years ago, it just wouldn't have happened. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which I join you from, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the East Kulin Nations. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I also pay my respects to all First Nations peoples and to their knowledge, language, culture, and their living connection to country. And I think it fits beautifully in with this idea of conservative. We're going to use chat throughout today. So I've just put the traditional, I thought I should start conservatively. I thought about a suit and tie actually, but I thought I'd drop that. But I popped into chat, there is the official definition of what conservative is, but it's how you think and act conservatively, follow procedures, and live within prescribed rules of the organisation. And think about that. Each of those is about coming from the external. So as this is the first of the reactive patterns, let's just step up and zoom out for a minute before we get into the detail of what conservative is. And to do that, I'd like to just share just a couple of slides. We're very happy to share these slides with you, of course. We know that conservative fits into the complying dimension and in the bottom half of the profile. So let's just think about the universal model of leadership. I mean, we know this top half of this profile when we look at this, and we've already started this process by exploring a couple of these creative competencies. But, we know there are 18 creative competencies. We know they're well-researched, positive, correlated leadership effectiveness, and so on. And I think the key to that top half is this idea that it's purpose vision driven, which moves us towards a generative operating system, an operating system which creates possibility, heads us towards purpose, heads us towards vision. And over the course of all of these different webinars, we're going to get to explore each of these. And of course, where we are today is focusing much more down in the bottom half. So this is the first of our reactive tendencies. And I think it's a really important point, this first point, which is about strengths run reactively. We know reactive tendencies are not bad, they're not broken, they don't need fixing. And at some point in our lives, they have absolutely served us. So as we think about conservative, how has conservative served you or served the leaders that you work with when you see extensions in this conservative reactive tendency? They've got us to where they are, and they perhaps are reaching their limits. And of course, we know that if the scores are high in the reactive, and particularly in conservative, there's some really subtle connections that we'll make over the course of this webinar between the high scores in the conservative and lower scores in both the creative and high scores in the reactive. But they fundamentally are going to interrupt that creative competencies and the possibilities and the outcomes that can be achieved. And so again, just thinking about the frame that we're setting this in, that the conservative fits into the reactive tendencies, which is a fear-driven move away from consumptive operating system. Lots of words, but just think about fear-driven. I'm worried about what's going to happen, what the outcome's going to be. And again, just stepping out from that as we think about the fundamental structure of mind, because when we think about conservative, we want to make shift and change with conservative. We need to think about, and coaching leaders who have high conservative, that the structure of mind that they're coming out of. So we may see a set of behaviors that we'll work with you on in terms of conservative, but the deeper picture and more important piece here is what's the fundamental structure of mind that conservative sits in. And of course, it's there on the left-hand side, as we all know. Fear-driven, problem, threat, fear, reaction. And so we often see in those with higher extensions in conservative, this oscillating pattern, this tendency to stick to rules, this tendency to follow the rules. And of course, that has a limiting belief. So last point, and then we'll actually get into the detail about conservative. We've all, again, from certification, we've seen the character structure, but I think there's a lovely way of thinking about this and setting the frame for our conversation today. That conservative is coming fundamentally from the complying group, which we know is about having a needy heart. I need people to care for me, want me, accept me. And that's the fundamental driver that sits beneath conservative. Yes, we know the gifts. It's people-oriented. They care about people. They like people. But the deeper fear that we want to work with, particularly as coaches, is that fear of being rejected. And so we see this behavior play out in their organizational life. And we sometimes get curious about that. But the more important work is, how do we work at the deeper level and understand, well, what's that fear about? Because that then drives the mindset of playing not to lose, I'm not safe, not okay, and a bit of a scarcity. So with that, just framing, I'd love to pass to you, Pauline, to sort of give us a little more detail in terms of conservative.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ian. And a big hello, everyone, to everyone around the globe. So happy to be here with you. And so conservative. So we're going to zoom in now and have a conversation about what does it actually look like on the ground, behaviorally, emotionally, physically. And I want to pick up where Ian left off, which is to underscore that at the end of the day, the bedrock in which conservative is sourced from is I'm not safe. And caution makes me safe. And I should, and I need to live up to the organization's rules and others' expectations. So and I really want to underscore that because conservative can manifest in many different ways. And particularly when its friends beside it is also quite high, like pleasing or passive. And so I do want to get into if that's the actual underlying mindset that can be at play when it's at, when it's running, how does that manifest behaviorally? Now, we have lots to share around that. But we firstly want to tap into your wonderful wisdom that's in the room. And I'd like you to bring to mind clients you have worked with, people you know that are high in the conservative extension. And just bring one or two to mind and think about, how do they show up behaviorally? Like, if I had a camera on them, what would I see them do? And pop your reflections into the chat, and we'll have a little bit of chat about what we're seeing then. And or you can think about how does that person dress? How do they show up in how they treat relationships in organizations? Or what are their nonverbals like? So go wherever feels good for you. All right, we'll give you a moment to post your reflections in chat.
Looks like the Enneagram is coming up. Energy around how people present themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. So themes here about playing to the rules, which can be part of the Enneagram, the delusion that I hold, I must stick to the playbook, love routine, love structure, love process. Okay.
Wanting to stick with the familiar looks to be showing up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Not rocking the boat, not venturing out.
Checking rules, policy before taking action. Absolutely. Or referencing those rules and policy. Oh, I'd love to. Oh, we could, but we've tried that once before. We tried that in the past. Does that fit in with our structure?
Yeah. Yeah. So they find, whether it's following the rules, the structure, maintaining the status quo, fitting in, dressing according to a particular standard, underneath it all is that I feel safe if I live up to those expectations and whatever those expectations are. And so, I do a lot of work in federal government in Australia, and behaviorally how that can show up for leaders as they hold that mindset is I avoid conflict. I don't want to have the difficult conversation. I'm not going to push, a bold agenda because I might be breaking the rules or it's too dangerous. I must not do that. Lovely. And body posture, that's an interesting one for leaders who overextend their conservative. And, think about that. How do they show up non-verbally? And I've got many clients who have extensions there, and it's often you're in a room with them and if we're in a circle doing team coaching work, their chair will be a little bit back from the circle. So it's like, I don't want to be seen. I want to be small and invisible. I was working with one client this week who's got an overdeveloped gift in conservative, and she says, when I'm working with these difficult stakeholders, I feel like I want to be a snail, like I just want to close in. So don't want to take up the space is often a common body posture, wanting to disappear.
Well, the other thing I often see too, Pauline, is it's almost like there's a painted smile. It's like I've got the face on, I've got the mask, I'm wearing the mask. So what's really going on behind that scene? It's really difficult to find. And so and you see in that, as you said, it's literally the physical. It could be the pulling back the chair, what's happening to eye contact, or usually not much eye contact. And so could be fiddling with the hair. So there's lots of clues to how these reactive patterns play out in all aspects. And of course, a little bit later when we start to talk about coaching, we know the power of this is because when we observe these things, it gives us the opportunity, because often when I have a I remember I once got feedback from a wife, Linda. She said, "Do you know that when you think, I think it was my left eyebrow went up or something, I had no physical experience of that, but apparently," and she said, "when that happens, it makes makes you look blah blah blah."
Yeah.
And so, these patterns that have served us, or these patterns that have become unconscious, we have no ability to see it. So for us, having seen a profile with a high conservative, we can sort of see how it plays out physically, somatically, behaviorally. But often for that leader, they don't actually have that awareness of how they're showing up.
That's right, because it is living and breathing in us, and it's in our muscle memory. It's stored in our body. And that's what makes anything in the reactive so tricky, because it can largely be unconscious until you maybe do this work and you can't see it. And so it has you rather than you have it. So on that note, Ian, shall we have a look at a classic profile that has high extensions in the conservative, so we can bring to life some of the dynamics that typically can be at play when we're working with conservative?
Just a minute, I'll bring it up. Oh, yes. Here it is. It should be coming up now.
Yep. That is it. Okay. All right, folks. So I'm going to share with you the context of this enterprise transformation later, and then I'm going to ask you a question.
Actually, Pauline, could we flip that? Could we ask first and think about, hey, with just what you're seeing and with your interpretation eyes on, again, if you wouldn't mind capturing chat here, just what stands out for you about this profile? And then let's provide the context if we can. So again, just as we did last time, put your, you imagine this as the leader you're about to debrief, and you see this profile for the first time. You may have a bit of background on them or not, and this is what you see. So I'd love to hear from you in chat. What stands out for you here? We can see the extensions there, but what else are you seeing? What draws your eye? What are you most curious about?
And Vinay Kumar has kicked us off with a very interesting profile for a leader in charge of transformation.
Touché,
we have a few things to say there or explore.
What else do you notice?
Yeah, so some of you are seeing some of the creative tensions that can play out in complying. We'll double click on that.
All right, let's some Oscar.
Yeah, high self-rating gaps, particularly in the reactive. Okay, so we're not going to read these. So I invite you to catch the eye of some postings there, so that you can start to expand what you're noticing in this profile. So, Ian, is it good for me to share the role context now? Or?
Yeah, yes, I think so. It's always interesting just to see the profile. I think it's interesting to see a profile without actually know the context.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a bit of a clue, obviously, in the enterprise transformation leader, as Vinay picked up. But even so, it's just what are you drawn to? Imagine this is the leader you're about to move into a 6 or 12-month coaching program with. What are you most curious about? Knowing, of course, once we get to meet them and learn more about the background, the history, their leadership journey, and so on, we may get some clues to why we're seeing what we're seeing. Pauline.
Yeah, and just on that, one of the questions we think about before we move into debriefing an LCP is to ask ourselves, what would it be like to be in the body, in the skin of a leader that owns this profile? And Renee has summarized it beautifully. Very fear-based. Approval is everything. And so this leader, she was a senior executive, is currently, but past tense will mean something in a second, was a senior executive leading enterprise transformation in a major government department in Australia. And so if you think about those words, enterprise transformation, what exactly does that mean? So she was responsible for ensuring that this, one of the biggest departments in Australia, is focused on the most strategic of change efforts and ensuring that they're adopting a common change methodology, influencing them to adopt best practices in leading change rather than the traditional change management processes. And then also like ensuring culture change, human dynamics is integrated into change projects. So, given that context, and when you look at this profile, we might ask, how well is this profile working for her? Well, it's not. It is a blocker to the delivery of her role and to her overall fulfillment and happiness. And you'll see there, conservative is a very, it's up past the 70th percentile. So, it's an overdeveloped gift for her. And why it's not working is that, well, she's been 3 years in this role. She's got a lot of passion for it, but she feels so frustrated and fatigued. And she described it as, I feel like a square peg in a round hole. I'm deeply committed, but I cannot influence my stakeholders to adopt good change practices. And so if you kind of think about how that might play out in a bureaucratic, with traditions of command and control, and has a lot of the traditions of hierarchical organizations, this is a particularly challenging influencing role because many parts of this organization, they're doing their own thing with leading change efforts, and they don't want to be slowed down by this central transformation hub. And her team are also walking with their feet because they don't feel they're making a difference. So thinking about our context, thinking about the impact that this profile is having, let's look at conservative and what role is it playing in acting as a blocker to our overall effectiveness. Well, here, I mean, you can see that all aspects of the complying is really high, and the one of the things I really want to illuminate is that conservative is slightly different to the other three tendencies, but there's still a lot of overlap in how it shows up. So conservative is, I must play within the structure. I must follow the rules. So it's much more structure orientated. Whereas the other three tendencies, pleasing, passive, and belonging, is I must play it safe with people. But underneath it, I'm wanting approval. I need to be accepted. So she, how it's showing up for her is that, for example, you can see that one of the patterns that often plays out with high conservative and indeed complying is that when it's really high, it impacts on lower scores in the achieving. So you can see this polarity play out here with, which is very pronounced. So for her, for example, she needs to consult with many before she makes a decision. So she's slow to make decisions. I observed her in team development session, and she won't disagree even though, she doesn't agree with the common view. Or if you have stakeholders who are pushing back on her change ideas, she'll not actually take a strong, firm stance for what she believes in because she's fearful that she'll be seen as incredible or she's off the mark. So you can see that creative tension between conservative and achieving. So she really wants to be influential. She wants to make a difference in how change is adopted in this department. So that's the vision that she's striving for. But that's intention with the current reality of I need to play it safe. I need to follow the rules.
Mm.
So I'll just pause there. Ian, I might just throw to you, what other connections or dynamics do you, from this profile or from others, where you see when conservative is at play?
Yeah, look, I think thanks, Pauline. I think the other, couple that are, certainly stand out for me here is courageous authenticity, which fits with, what you're saying in terms of her ability to hold her ground or push back or argue sort of within a meeting and stand for something. And so we see this incredibly low courageous authenticity. The other one I think, which is interesting in this profile, I mean, the achieving in a way we would expect if we think, traditionally about opposites, high conservative, high complying, usually impacts over on achieving, and we absolutely see that here. So we see the courageous authenticity, I think, low. But the other one I think that's really interesting here from a coaching perspective is the personal learner. And yet again, on each of these, her self-scores aren't super high, but they're generally 25 percentile points or greater than how others are seeing her. So there's still this, what's the belief? What's the story that she's telling herself where she says, oh, yeah, I think I can do these things. Where her collective evaluator groups are fundamentally saying, we're not seeing it at all. And we know personal learner is actually that ability to sit back and reflect and think about, well, what's the project comes to a particular point, do we ever stop and do any reviews to find out, well, what's worked and what hasn't? Oh no, because we're busy and we keep moving forward. And you see that also in her high driven down there in controlling. Mm. And so it's this low courage, low personal learner, and this, I'm fascinated to think about, well, what's the backstory here? This led to this belief about I have to comply with the rules, and I also have to be liked by others. The last thing I'd ask you about, just looking at this, is I'm also curious about her extensions in controlling, because again, her collective evaluators don't see any controlling, and yet for her, she sees it. Oh yes, I'm super driven. I'm pretty high perfect. We know perfect often will fit in with the belonging and pleasing piece. If I can just do it, get it right, people will like me. Is often a pattern that I see. So yes, I'm just curious if there, because I know you're working with her in terms of that, if there's anything that comes to mind, so share that.
Yeah, that's great. And that's why, at the Leadership Circle, we emphasize that the profile is a moment in time and it's a reflection of your context, your life story. And so we do some work there. And what are your habits, your patterns, your belief systems? And so the personal learner, what was useful to coach her around and for her to see that she was lacking vulnerability in doing her own deep development work. She didn't feel safe to, as you talked about, doing those mid-project review or post-change reflections with difficult stakeholders for fear of she'd be seen as not credible or she'd be off the mark. Now, why? Because for years and years and years, she was underinvested in as a leader in this big department. And what happens in federal government departments is that once you reach a senior executive role, you stay there. You're not going to be sacked, but you end up moving around because the leader or the sponsor just wants to get rid of you. You're not performing very well. So she has been moved around for many, many years and ultimately has lost confidence in herself. Which brings me to the second point, which which is around her high extensions in controlling. I mean, she's not controlling. She hands over her power rather than stands in her power. Why is there high extensions? Because at the end of the day, there's an anxious self that's at play. So not only do I need to play it safely within my box, conservative, I need to color within the lines, conservative, but I also need to be making sure it's flawless, it's perfect. I need to push myself really hard, driven. And how that showed up behaviorally was because I'm also coaching her leadership team, and she takes copious notes, like over efforting in the meetings, just constantly taking notes. And when she speaks, it's just lots of words, like so much. I call it, in the controlling, spilling energy. It's like, oh. So that's going on for her on the inside, but she's not pushing her team hard. So that's why it hasn't been externalized in the eyes of her evaluators.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm.
There's an interesting comment. If you got Mark Yules has an interesting comment. Might have a read and see if there's anything, because I know you've got the personal experience of this particular profile. Just while you're doing that, yes, I see lots of other great comments here. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
The experience here, the overextension. So I was thinking about the comment that you got in there about leadership effectiveness. You see the self-score leadership effectiveness super higher than others, generally the higher self-scores than others. So, my heart goes out to this leader, because you can sort of feel the fear, you can feel the concern and worry about how am I showing up, how am I viewed here.
Yeah. So Mark makes an excellent point, which is that when are these roles set up to fail? Because she had sponsorship in theory, but not in action. And so in like these really very, very senior meetings, leaders that are reporting to the ministers and the prime ministers of Australia, and she's inviting them to be thinking differently about how they're strategically leading change. And they're pushing back, going, we're not having a bar of that. We're way too busy writing a formal briefing for the minister. She wasn't being backed by her sponsor. And so that then triggered and reinforced the existing fear that existed, that I am not enough. It's too safe. It's too risky for me to actually move forward. And so I'll just opt for incremental, low risk tweaks to change. And in the end, actually, I just heard this week, the Transformation Hub has been dismantled. So I think that's just something to watch for. I want to just make a couple of other points about a classic profile, and then we might move into how we might coach this, Ian.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Keep an eye on the time here. And I was thinking about this overnight, actually, because the challenge with working with conservative, particularly when you're working in the public sector, is that leaders will turn a blind eye to it, because they go, well, don't I just work in a conservative culture? And so if you think about typical big departments, you must respect your chain of command. Like, you must stay within your swim lane. You must avoid challenging your senior leaders, because that could be career limiting. So I think the work for us coaches is to honor the cultural norms that they're swimming in, because that's real, that's their reality. But where within that could they move from using conservative as a shield, like I'm going to armor up and use it as a shield, to using it more as a scaffold, where I can experiment with small acts of courage. For example, I'm not going to shame my manager in the middle of this meeting. how about I give him some unfiltered feedback outside the meeting? Or, I might show a little bit more vulnerability or whatever, make a bold decision somewhere that it feels safe. So I think that's because this is what I come up against a lot. That's our culture norm. It's our role. It's our role to be follow the rules. I'm a lawyer. I mean, sure, okay, so honor that. And where in your role is there scope for taking risk in service of your vision? So I just wanted to name those two things. So Ian, shall we have a chat about, well, how what would be some of the things to think about when we're coaching a classic conservative profile?
Yes, absolutely. And let's just briefly reference back, to, well, what's the coaching arc, or what's the way that we can typically work through this process. And I refer back to the frame that we use in certification. I think it's not the only frame, but I think it's quite a powerful frame. It's this idea of actually starting well with what am I up to right here. And so, of course, in actually completing the LCP, that's that first opportunity for them to actually see the results, get the results, and then work from there. But it's a very simple question, but this idea, what am I actually up to? And so what sits beneath that is this, am I even aware of what I'm up to? Which is why often the first step when we start to think about this shift out of the reactive into the creative is building awareness is number one. And then step two is actually doing that awareness work, and thinking about, as we asked, before, we asked, well, what do we see behaviourally with conservative? What do we see in their voice in conservative? What do we see in their dress in conservative? And so the awareness work is the key first step. Is, well, how is this showing up? And think about that. Well, somatically, when this plays out for me, what do I feel in my body? Where do I notice conservative? Where do I feel conservative? What's the thoughts that are going through my head when I think about conservative? And so again, because with that awareness, at least with awareness, I have the possibility of choice. Without awareness, I have no other choice. Third step is then thinking about, okay, now that I've built that awareness, well, how do I now manage that? What's my centering process? Lots of different approaches that we can use in that. And I know you've got a couple that we'll talk about. And then, of course, well, now what do I want to move towards? The unlocking question number two. Where's my purpose and vision? And moving into this period of experimentation. How do I start to create some small, safe to fail experiments? Not walking in, right, I'm going to walk into the minister's office, I'm going to walk into my boss's office and tell them exactly what I'm thinking. Perhaps that is too far a stretch. What's the first small step? What would 5% higher score in courageous authenticity sound and feel and look like for you? And so we're wanting them to start that experimentation, short, safe to fail experiments, because we're here not trying to change behavior yet. We're trying to start to build the confidence and understanding that I can do this differently and get a different outcome. And then, of course, we end up with the creating outcomes. And finally, this much longer term shift, which is updating the narrative or making the shift fundamentally from that reactive operating system into this creative operating system. So, Pauline, in terms of this particular leader, what would any additional specific coaching that you used to take this person forward?
Yeah, so I think given the conservative culture she lives in, and even though her role is not conservative at all, but she's surrounded by a lot of conservative roles, we spent quite a bit of time in just normalizing it, and not make her wrong for staying within the rules, but helping her see this is your roots, this is the world you live in, you're just standing on these patterns. And it's not just the first couple of sessions, but it's 6 months, 12 months. It's ongoing practice of awareness, bringing awareness to when conservative is working for her. Like, I need to write this brief with this font, with this template, but when it's actually hindering her. And to do that, it was important for her to get clear on her vision. And so, in the leadership circle, we talk a lot about get clear on the vision that's worth taking a risk for. What's the outcomes we want to create? So for her, her vision was to be more influential so that she could start to make a difference for her team and for the practice of strategically leading change. So that was her declared improvement goal that we got to. Now, if you just stop there and you tell her, oh, well, start to, make some bold decisions, we know, because the reactive mind is deeply rooted, not an awful lot would change. So we spent a bit of time helping her get clear on what are the underlying beliefs that's running that conservative. So she's got one foot on the gas. I want to be more influential. And then we highlighted her foot that was on the brake, which is she had this unconscious competing commitment to stay within safe boundaries and to play it safe. And while that's there, it's very hard to make a change. And then we dug a little bit underneath that foot that's on the brake, and the underlying assumption, there was a few, but the one that I remember was, I assume if I'm too bold in my decision making, I'll make an error. I'll be seen as not credible. So can you see how there's connections there with the controlling, which is a fear of failure? So it's helping her see that, and look at the bigger system that's at play, that's holding her back from being influential. So we did a bit of work there, and there's lots of different tools you can work with that. And the other piece that I think with clients who've got very high extensions in complying, even in the dynamic in the coach, they're lovely to work with. They're pleasing, they're easy. And so for her to really get to know her conservative, we did some work around parts of self, where she got to speak to this conservative part. And because I wanted her to see, this is not all of you. I know you're in a conservative culture, but this is just a part of you. And it's played this protective role. It's served you well. It's controlled by rules. But I want you to get to know it and hold compassion for it. So we had, she dialogues with this conservative part with curiosity, and then just help her release this conservative part of her from the burden of needing to play it safe. So we did some work there, which was quite powerful for her. And now we're just in that phase of experimenting. So I could say
Beautiful.
so much more, but I'm
Yeah.
Let me jump in just real quick, if it's okay, because we're getting close to time, and I want to make sure that there's time to answer some questions if folks want to start putting some questions into the chat. But also, Pauline, you had included a list of several coaching questions that, as you're talking about the work that you did with that leader in particular, I can put those in the chat, and you can maybe speak to some of what those questions helped prompt in terms of growth. And then, folks, if you have questions, now's a great time. Drop them into chat, and we will have a few minutes here. We'll get some Q&A in just a minute.
And just while we're doing that, do you want to pop that other unusual profile up, Pauline? Just very briefly, not to, we won't spend a lot of time on it all, so I know we're doing. Profile would have different experience.
Yeah. So we've titled this The Paradox of Conservative and Creative. So just a headline newspaper sentence: female leader, director of a department's payroll system, in the role for 30 years. And not in that role, in the organization for 30 years. And she has, very deep formative experiences that has led to her conservative nature. And what I want you to think about is that here you've got a leader who is extraordinarily creative, inspiring, relationally orientated, gets the job done.
Mm.
However, is still held back by some inner caution. And the conservative dimension in this profile is not an explicit blocker like it is in the previous profile. It's a bit more subtle. And Ian and I were shooting the breeze on this last night, and Ian comes up with a lovely term. It's an invisible handcuff.
Mm.
I love that. And so when I was digging into, helping her to illuminate how conservative is playing out in her life, um, she gets triggered into playing it safe when she doesn't trust others, which gave rise to this whole coaching engagement.
Mm.
So, we want to highlight this because you can be wonderfully creative, but conservative can still get in the way.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
And there's one subtlety, and I'll use this also just as a plug to, I know not everyone uses the coach report anymore, but this is the actual coach breakout of her, of that profile. So you look at that profile and you go, wow, look at this. There must be some story, but it's overall very strong. But in fact, when you actually dig into the detail, just a couple of things we've highlighted. It was a very unusual in terms of 36 evaluators, so that's another story. And if you've got 14 directs and 15 others, so clearly they're going to have a massive impact on what we see in a profile. But actually, have a look at what the boss's view of this leader is, and sort of see how, in fact, this conservative and what the other extensions are. And here is the classic. If I also just highlight the perfect in a the perfect from the boss is 76th percentile. We see this sort of classic, well, if I can just have really high standards and make it all work, it's going to work out. So there's always subtleties in a profile, and then think about, even though this person has been very successful within this organization, has been there a long time, and works in payroll. So there's the golden handcuffs. She's beautifully successful in an organization and a structure which is conservative by nature. You're dealing with people's pays. You don't want to get it wrong, clearly. And so, I can default and use my conservative tendencies because it fits, the organizational culture actually fits my culture. But if I was thinking about this individual from a developmental perspective and where is she going to go from a career perspective, the boss has some very strong, capable views, caring connection 100%, boss's team play 20%. Wow. There's lots of stories that we could dig into here and follow through. So, we know the power of this profile, and of course, this is in the new report as well. But I just use this because you can get it all on one page. You can also then look at what are the lowest creative competencies here. And again, even though the pattern is a lot subtler than we saw in the other classic one, their strategic focus systems, thinkers, the selfless and achieves results. So there is the impact of this high conservative on their achieving scores. So even though the headline looks very different, we still see there are some similar themes in terms of how high conservative, high complying plays out. And I know we're almost at time, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I think with conservative, it is very useful for the client to see where the source of it's from, because conservative is typically, for a lot of us, comes from our upbringing, our traditional family values. For her, she came from a strong Catholic upbringing, and that helps them both appreciate it and honor it, and then invite them to think about, is that degree of caution, and you must not break the rules, not break any of the 10 commandments. How well is that serving you now? What's the energetic cost? And I often find that's a breakthrough for conservative dimension, because they go, well, I was brainwashed into be a Catholic, and I don't know why I still do all this stuff or whatever it is. I'm not saying, Catholic's great. I'm a Catholic, but yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good one to do. And just to pick up on one other thing you said there, Ian, which is in this profile, there's a relationship between conservative and perfect. So, like for example, when we start the coaching sessions, she opens with, I haven't done my coaching homework. Oh gosh, I'm not perfect. I haven't, like the subtext is, I haven't stuck to the rules. So you can see it play out just in the dynamics. So yeah, and some of the questions that Sarah has put into the chat, that's the stuff we can weave in to really highlight the conservative. All right, we've 5 minutes left, folks. Where do we want to go in our final 5 minutes?
Well, we've been getting a lot of really great comments, and in the chat, it's been lively commenting on both profiles and some of the insights that you've brought forward. We haven't had any questions pop up, and generally speaking, but I have one that I'm hoping maybe you can take just a minute on before we wrap up, which is just that how do you handle misconceptions about conservative? Because the word conservative carries a lot of connotations coming from various perspectives. But when someone's coming in and you tell them, or they see that they are scoring high in conservative, how do you overcome any misconceptions or misunderstandings about what that actually means with a client?
Yeah. Well, Pauline, should I start? Then you jump in.
Yeah.
The first and simplest approach there is take them back to the source data, which is the questions that they actually answered. Because the challenge we know with sometimes people will see a label and go, oh, conservative, that means blah, 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 or courageous authenticity or fosters team play or whatever it is. So the first point of call, of course, is always to take them back to the questions that fit for conservative, because that's the actual source data. And so that's my first point, is to get clarity about. So when you look at those questions, which of those do you have more energy about? Which of those are the ones that, for you, you feel you would have rated higher or others would have rated you higher on? Pauline?
And honor their current meaning making of it, that it's my role, it's part of my culture. It's too psychologically unsafe to move. So honor that, and then bring them to the edge of their meaning making of conservative. So we're honoring the shape of their mindset as it is with conservative, and then so let's double click on, what does your conservative look like in a typical meeting? So bring to mind where you get a bit edgy, or you get triggered, or, you're like feeling nervous in a meeting. Yeah, think of that one. And then we work through it. So what did you do? And you'll find that they'll say, it's just, I can see the agenda is going off the rails, but it's just not common practice to tell the chair that we're going off in a tangent. That's conservative. I'm sticking within the playbook of how meetings are run, even though they're useless. And so then they start to, because this is the beauty of working with the reactive. As coaches, we are helping them see more clearly the reactive and what's available to them, what choices are available to them when they see it. And a lovely mentor, it might have been you, Ian, said to me one day that you can't be so in your reactive when you start being a witness of it. And you can be more choiceful about how you show up. So that'll be just some of the ways.
Well, thank you. That's a fantastic answer to that question. And this has been a fantastic conversation, really rich, really dynamic. Thank you so much for digging in to both profiles, to showing us so much about conservative. That about wraps it up for us. We have literally 90 seconds left until the top of the hour. So I just want to invite everyone on the call to come join us next month. We're going to be tackling the personal learner dimension. Watch the Leadership Circle social media. Watch your inbox for information and a registration opportunity to come join us in July. And with that, on behalf of Leadership Circle and our guest speakers, Pauline and Ian, I am Sarah Stahl saying thank you so much for your time and attention today, and we really hope to see you next time.